Now that we've created our article class and we have a basic understanding of how Eloquent works, why don't we next review the process of creating a controller, fetching records from the database, and displaying them on the page through our view. That'll be a nice, simple level 1 example. So as I see it, our first step is we need to create the controller, but we also need to register the route. So if we go to routes.php, I've already showed you this one way to register routes. Specify the URI, and then the controller name, @, and then the method that should be called. However, if you want to, and this is especially useful for really small, quick stuff, well, you could say route get foo, and then just pass a closure here. So for example, if I return bar, this in fact would work. And just to prove that to you, if we visit this page in the browser, sure enough, we do get the response. So that can be really convenient, especially for things like APIs. However, for your typical application, I much prefer this approach right here. So let's say when the user makes a GET request to articles, then we want to load an articles controller, and specifically a method on it called index. All right, we've registered the route, but we don't yet have an articles controller. Let's do that now. PHP artisan make a controller called articles controller. And once again, I just want a plain stub there. All right, let's take a look at that. And we're ready to get started. So we call a method index on it, and let's just see if this works. How about get all articles? All right, so back to the browser, and we visit articles, and we have triggered that method. Awesome. So the next step is, well, we want to fetch all articles, right? And you learned how to use some basic Eloquent methods in the last lesson. So let's just try it. Articles equals, and I want to use it like this. We learned about using article all. But don't forget, we have to reference the full namespace. So instead, I'm just going to import the class at the very top. Okay, so now this is actually pretty clean, especially for smaller CRUD-based apps. This is great, nothing to change here. So now, watch what happens if we just return the results of that call. If we switch back and give it a refresh, take a look. We return JSON. So this is one of the cool things about Laravel. It's smart enough to know that if we just return something like this, well, maybe we're building a very basic API or something like that, in which case we should cast everything to JSON. And if you want to take a look at the actual raw output, that's what we get there. Pretty cool, right? All this stuff just comes straight out of the box. But of course, in this case, we actually want to format it nicely, create some HTML. So that's not what we want. Instead, we want to load a view. Return a new view, articles.index, using the convention we talked about. And then finally, I want to pass through an articles variable. So remember, we can type it like that, or if you want to be a little more explicit, you could do this. Either approach works. In my case, though, for basic stuff, I kind of like the approach of using compact here. But make up your own mind. No wrong or right on that one. So that's our next step. If I switch back to resources, views, we need to create a new articles folder. articles/index.blade.php. Next, don't forget that we have this master page here, and we reviewed this idea of a layout file in one of the previous lessons. So now all we have to do is extend it and create a section for our content, and if there's anything special for the footer, we can do that as well. Cool. So extends app. Next, for my section, content here, we'll begin with a simple H1 that says articles. All right, let's review this in the browser, refresh, and there we go. We have our HTML, and we've inserted that content right within the container tag. So now, don't forget, within our view, we have access to this articles variable. So all I really want to do is filter through the articles and display each one. Okay, easy enough. Using Blade, I can say @for each articles as article, and then close this out. And to begin, why don't we use an article element here, just coincidentally, and we'll have an H2 where we echo out the article's title. Finally, we need a section for the body, so we can do article body. All right, cool. So if we come back and refresh, we have 2 articles in this case. This is what we created in the very previous lesson when we were toying around with PHP Artisan Tinker. So very cool. That wasn't hard at all. Now that we understand how to display all articles, what about doing the simple blog format where you just want to review one single article? How do we do that? Okay, well, we want this to be clickable, right? Typical blog format. So we will wrap this within an anchor tag, and there's also a helper function that I'll show you about later. But for now, let's just use basic HTML. And how do we set the href here? Well, we don't even have a route registered yet, so let's figure that out. How about if I duplicate this, if we visit articles / and then either the article slug, but we don't have that yet, we'll just go with an ID. So when we want to represent a wildcard, well, here's the format we can use here. We give it a name, ID, and then we wrap it within curly braces. So this means we want to capture anything in this particular segment of the URI. So that means if the user requests articles / foo, then we will capture that key foo, and then we will load articles controller at show. Okay, let's set that up really quickly so I can show you this. We have a new method, show. Now that's going to accept the ID. So that means if we just fetch that and return it, and notice that behind the scenes, Laravel will automatically call the show method and pass through the ID. But let's see this in action. So articles / foo, and we fetched it. And notice we don't have any restraint here. So if we passed 1, then that will still work. And you can change that if you want to use a regular expression to designate specifically what we want to match. But in this case, it's okay. We're not concerned with it. So now we have the ability to capture an identifier for the article. And in this case, it's the ID of the article, which makes it unique. And really, if you think about it, that's not really good. We don't want to use some kind of database column to represent a specific article. That's not very intuitive, is it? Wouldn't it be better if the identifier was some kind of unique slug that represented the article? For example, my first article. That would be a little more appropriate. But in this case, we don't have that, so we're going to stick with an ID for now. It's okay for our demo. So how would we fetch the article that has a specific ID? And we already reviewed this in the previous episode. This should be easy for you. Old news. Article, find the item that has the ID. And once again, to show you, I'm going to return the article where it will be converted to JSON. So we run it, and there you go. There's the ID of 1. The second one is a different one. But what if we do one that doesn't exist, like 3? Okay, well, notice that we don't see anything because null, in fact, was returned. If we ever want to dump anything to really peek into it, we can use this die dump function. So notice if I pass this and we come back and refresh, we can actually see what we're working with. In this case, it's just null. But if we do one of the other ones, you can peek into that article object and really see what you're working with, which is awesome. But now think about it. If we have the option of returning null, well, as you can imagine, as soon as we load a view like this, return view articles.show, and then once again we pass through the article, well, we expect properties to be available on that, right? We expect to do article title. However, article is null, so when we run that in our view, of course it's going to fail. You can't call a property on null. So it sounds like we need some way to say, well, if the results are null, then redirect or throw an exception or abort, whatever you want to do. Now the manual way to do this, there's a better way, but the manual way would be to say something like if is null article, or you could also just say if not article, to see if it's falsy. But if it's null, then something's weird, so why don't we just abort? And let's just show a 404 page. Okay, so now we try it, and there you go. We actually get a 404 page for the user. And remember, don't forget, right now we can actually see the exception, but for production, if we go back to config/app.php, and we scroll to the top, don't forget you would set debug to false in your production.env file. So that's what it would look like for production. If we take a look, that's what they'd see. And of course, you can tailor this however you want. All right, quick note there. So if we go back though, we don't have to do this because if you think about it, this would be the sort of boilerplate that you'd have to do basically every single time. If this is null, then do this. Instead, Laravel helps us. I can just say find or fail. Or in other words, find the record that has this ID, but if you couldn't find it, fail. So now we come back and refresh, and notice that Laravel will throw this custom exception, model not found exception. So we can then catch that anywhere in our app and handle it however we need to. That's how that works. Okay, but we will review all of this stuff in the future, so don't feel like you have to commit everything to memory. Instead, let's go ahead and create our view here. So we already have an index. We next need show.blade.php, and let's steal just a little bit of this. All right, so rather than all articles, I want to display the article's title. And we don't need to filter through it, so I can just say within here, article body. Okay, let's take a look. So we will go to articles/1, and there's that one. Articles/2, and we get the other. And if we go to /articles, we can see a listing of each one. However, we haven't yet wired up the actual href, so we can do that right now. Back to our index view, how can we do this? And I'll show you a couple ways. Well, one, we could always just hard code it, so articles, and then tack on article/ID. Yeah, that would work. Come back, refresh, and if I view the source, now we have the correct href. And if you want to see, there you go. There's that one and that one. So a very basic blog can be accomplished in just a couple minutes. It's not hard at all. But anyhow, if we switch back, there's other ways we could represent this as well. For example, if you'd rather not think about the URI and instead think in terms of the controller method that you want to call, for example, you just want to say, I want to link to whatever the correct URI is so that we can trigger the show method. Okay, well here's how you do that. Change this, and Laravel gives us a nice helper function, action. We give it the name, so this would be articles controller @show. And then next, if there's any parameters we need to pass through, we can do that as an array, article ID. So that would be another way to do this. Let's try it out. Refresh, and we should still get the same thing, and we do. Now finally, if you don't like that approach, you could also use a URL function. So we could say URL to articles, and then we can pass through any additional segments. In this case, the article's ID. All right, so let's try that approach. Give it a refresh, and if we view the source, we get the exact same thing. So this will work as well. So as you can see, there's actually a number of different ways to handle this stuff. And there's even things that we haven't talked about yet. For example, in the future, we will talk about this idea of named routes, where you assign a identifier, some kind of name for a given route. Then, if you ever want to link to that, well, once again, you have this route function you can use. This time we're saying, go to the route that has the name of whatever we give it, maybe article path. So that would be an option too. But I don't want to overwhelm you, so stick with URL or the action function, whichever feels good to you. All right, but good work. Already in this series, you've learned how easy it is to create controllers, to generate them, in fact. You've learned how to use the active record pattern to very easily associate an object with a database row, essentially. And then finally, you've learned how within our controller, it's so easy to fetch that data and load a view and display it. It's just not that hard.